Good afternoon, New Orleans, and welcome to Put Housing First. I'm your host, Andrenica Morris, and we are here this 14th day of 2025 with our first live Put Housing First show of the year. Remember, we are here to talk about what it means to put people first by putting housing first. I want to welcome you all. My name is Andrenica Morris. Welcome you all to today's show. We have a enlightening show today. I typically try to be upbeat, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of challenges out there right now. And as I said, this is the first 14 days of 2025, and it's been a heck of a year already. This great city has been once again marred by, it almost seems silly to say unimaginable tragedy. But here we are yet again, facing down an issue that I don't think most people thought was something that we had to be particularly concerned about. Just joining the ranks of cities marred by other great cities whose communities have been forever changed because of terrorism. And again, over our long history, we have had those issues. But in this modern age of disasters and catastrophes and crises, we haven't faced this yet. So, want to take a minute and acknowledge those losses. We're going to talk a little bit about that today with the guests that we have on today. But we are going to focus, as we always do, on what it means to put housing first. And I am so excited for our guest, who is a repeat guest, who is back with us again. Joe, thank you for calling in. Thank you for being with us. Joseph Herrenmuller with Unity for New Orleans. Joe, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Andrenica. I'm glad to be here.
So I've been struggling with folks to say who I haven't seen, and I'm typically one of those New Year's people who make the corny jokes about, oh, I haven't seen you all year, or I haven't talked to you all year. But this does feel like a little bit more solemn occasion. And while I want to wish you a happy and joyous new year, Graylin Banks just reminded me that we do need to be reflective of and be appreciative of that. But I also want to say welcome to 2025 because there's a lot of work to be done. So welcome and happy new year to you, Joe.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you. I wish you as well and your listeners a happy new year. And I'm glad to be like a lot of us, we're already, settling into work.
That's right. That's right. So part of
what we do.
Yep, that's what we do. Part of what we wanted to talk about today is after there's been a successive string of events recently, right? Last week, I think we all started the new year off knowing that there was a lot of work to do, particularly when it comes to the housing insecurity crisis that we are focusing on overall. And we believe that you have to focus on parts of it, to think about it, but we cannot ignore that, and we can no longer do what we used to do back in the bad old days, to continue to separate parts of housing insecurity. And that's one of the things that used to happen was housing work was seen as distinctive from the work with the homeless. And thankfully, we no longer think like that. I don't know if everybody feels that way, but your organizations, my organizations, your partners, our partners, they're all the same because we get it that the needs of the unhoused is the ultimate expression of the failure of our housing market.
That's right.
Specific interventions are needed. That's what Unity for Greater New Orleans focuses on. But we also want to make sure that it is what it means when we say put housing first. And that's even a spin on that affirmative way we talk about the housing advocacy is a spin on and is rooted in the way people, working on behalf of the unhoused, it's y'all's philosophy, right? Housing first.
Yeah, the housing first philosophy is, or approach to addressing homelessness is a homeless response that is rooted in best practices, that understands that permanent solutions to housing are centered on permanent housing outcomes, not simply on shelter or on the housing first name, it distinguishes itself from a housing readiness approach, which was a way that
Mm-hmm.
homeless providers had approached homeless services for many years, but has it grew out of favor specifically because it wasn't effective.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't reach the people who really needed it the most. And a housing first approach doesn't mean housing only, but it
That's
means
right.
housing and supportive services wrapped together to provide people who are vulnerable because of their position on the street or in shelters, who are vulnerable because most often people with long-term homelessness have multiple co-occurring disabilities. The Housing First approach says we can house you and we can provide you with the supports that you need to remain housed. And that has proven to be a very effective way of addressing homelessness for folks who have become unhoused. But as you have stated today and many times before, in seeking solutions to the housing crisis, we need to make sure that housing is affordable for everybody
Mm-hmm.
so that you don't have new people falling into homelessness
That's
or
right.
people who have been housed falling back into homelessness.
That's right. And that
Um,
people have options because things happen, right? We often focus on the negatives, someone falling behind on their rent. But what if someone wants to move? What if someone has successfully overcome being homeless and they want to move? That they should be able to do that, right?
that's right.
And be able to find somewhere else to live because there's an ample supply of affordable housing, or there is at least a system in place to help them move. If
That's
they're
right.
yeah, if they're stable here, why can't they be stable somewhere else? If that's where they
That's
want
right.
to be.
Yeah, and that's we live in a free society, and
Last time
that's
I checked.
predicated that's predicated on people's ability to move, people's ability to improve, and the programs that we manage do allow for that. But when housing markets are very tight, it does restrict and affect people's ability to improve and to move. And so, making sure that there are ample housing options available for everybody means that there's housing options for people who are homeless or formerly homeless as well.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So we wanted to kind of ground there because over the last week you kicked off the week like we did, getting some work done. And on Friday, and it seems like there's just been successive bad news on Friday, and we had William Most on before the end of the year to talk about the lawsuit, the actions that we've seen the state take against the unhoused populations, against our friends and neighbors who find themselves unhoused here in New Orleans, and how that legal challenge had stopped, had halted those relocations without notice. And those relocations, just to remind the listening audience, not only were they disruptive of the process that many folks were trying to navigate to find housing. There was also some concern about what was happening to their property. It shattered trust that folks had been building, and for my opinion, it was just wrong. And the courts stopped it, and then we got on Friday the news that the Supreme Court was allowing the Landry administration, the state government, to move in. And then on Monday, as almost if they knew it was coming, the the governor announced this plan to temporarily augment. It's the best way I can put it, but I have real problems with this, and I won't be upfront about that, Joe. That they would take a warehouse on France Road that's owned by the Port of New Orleans, pour $16 million into it for maybe 90 days so that the homeless would not be, that they could have somewhere to take people and get them out of the CBD, at least during Mardi Gras, the Super Bowl and Mardi Gras. That announcement was made yesterday, and I know that you all have to work because your job is not just to be outraged and indignant about things. You have to work within these parameters. So I want you to talk us through what you all know so far. You don't have to editorialize. Leave that to me. But if you can walk us through what is going to start happening, and I believe this is going to go live tomorrow morning at 5 a.m.
Yes, I don't want to get ahead of the state and
Mm,
talk about what they have planned, but we do understand that they have a plan to provide a temporary emergency shelter, like you said, in the Gentilly neighborhood. Um, we haven't seen the facility yet, and although they have spoken to us a little bit about what they have planned there. The important thing to keep in mind from our point of view is that homeless response should always be something that's voluntary. If people want to go into shelter, it's good that we have a variety of low barrier shelters available to people. Um, and low barrier shelters can be a platform to get folks permanently housed, but it can't be an end game because shelter is only one step towards permanent housing. Um, we need to work towards keeping people permanently housed. We need to get folks who are experiencing homelessness um, housed, and we have been working on that in partnership with the city and Travelers Aid since September of 2023. We have housed hundreds of folks from directly from unsheltered situations into housing. We know we can do that. We have other programs that rely on folks experiencing shelter um, and getting into shelter. So we can work with folks in a variety of different situations to make sure that they get into housing, and we're going to continue to do that.
oh, so we got a caller, Joe. Thanks for joining us, Benson.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Thank you for calling in, Benson.
Hi. And I have called before, and I'm glad I have your guests online. And if you could talk a little bit more about, I guess, low barrier shelters, or I have a family member who went into a shelter, and I have explained this before. They had to pay like a $10 fee.
Mm,
They had to be out of the shelter by 7, in the shelter by 5. And it just was like, a person that didn't really have income coming in. It would seem like it was a bit of some hurdles to jump over.
so
And I
you're
do
not.
believe she mentioned Unity, where she would get a voucher from Unity. But I was just trying to see more specifically, what can this person do now who's happen to be living in our quarters with us, but we're still trying to get her into some type of situation where she could be helped
Okay,
into permanent housing.
gotcha.
And what would a person like her scenario be like? And I'll just listen. That's okay.
Thank you, Benson.
Thank you, Benson. Is the person does the person in question have
Oh,
children living with her?
I don't think so. He just signed off. But could you
Okay.
take us through, Joe, the two scenarios? So a single person, what they would need to do, and then maybe someone with children, because I think a lot of the listening audience would want to understand that, and because I think that is important as we're talking about this larger issue. Um, remembering that there are folks dealing with this, and Unity is here to help with this, as Joe said.
Yeah. So thank you. So if for single adults who are having a housing crisis, the best resource that we have available, the Information and Referral Service, um, that's operated by the Travelers Aid Society, can be reached at 504-658-2944. And they can refer folks to shelters. There's a variety of shelters, some of which are low barrier, some of which have some barriers, as your caller described. And so the folks there, 658-2944, can help direct single adults to shelter. If it's a case of a family with children having a housing crisis, our family coordinated entry line is 356-1859. This would be a situation where a family was already living or imminently at risk of having to live in a street and needing a shelter situation. It's not necessarily a rental assistance line, but that number is 356-1859. And we also have services here in New Orleans through Covenant House, which is really focused on youth 22 and under. And they can be reached at 584-1111. They really specialize in youth homelessness and responses to youth homelessness. And so I would encourage folks in that age bracket, whether they're unaccompanied or even if they have children, to reach out to Covenant House.
Thank you, Joe. And so that's an important question, I think, that connects to the larger topic. There are folks right now, the state is talking about introducing and adding another 200 beds. And I think one of the questions that Benson asked was about the low barrier shelter. And I think that there's some confusion about that, right? So there's a number of shelters in New Orleans, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, there are a variety of shelters in New Orleans. Unity doesn't operate any shelters, but we work in partnership with shelter operators
Right.
to
And
navigate folks to housing.
tell me if I'm wrong, but typically low barrier shelters don't charge, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So if and that doesn't mean that it's not a good shelter if it does ask for a charge, but it is different, and I think that's important to note. So there's a low barrier shelter that the city of New Orleans owns and operates, or I mean, well,
Uh,
they're responsible for.
they're responsible for it. It's operated by Odyssey House of Louisiana.
Right, and so it's got about 200 beds, and that's one of the places where, for example, when the freeze warnings came in, they throw open the doors, right, and try to get as many people out of harm's way as possible.
It's part of the freeze plan, and that's something that the city does in cooperation with the shelter operators. Most shelters do participate in the city's freeze plan when there are nights below 40 degrees.
Right, and so the shelters that ask for contributions, donations, or charge, however it's framed, a per night fee, that's they're operating a nonprofit or providing as probably as I think a lot of our faith-based organizations operate shelters, right? Not a lot of,
Correct.
but many of the operators are faith-based organizations, and they are allowed to set standards or set rules.
Sure, and conduct operations in a way that works for their organization.
Yeah.
And that's not to criticize or compliment. It's simply how it goes. And if folks want to go to those places, they certainly can. We have unfortunately a situation where there are fewer shelter beds available than people experiencing homelessness on a given night. But the answer isn't always to add more shelter beds because we don't want to, in the broader term, in the longer range, we don't want to have more people staying in shelter. We want to have fewer people staying in shelter and more people winding up with permanent housing outcomes. And so, if we can improve shelter flow, we can still shelter the people who need it and house people at a more rapid pace.
So this is the system that we have, and so now the state is proposing to at the most generous assessment to augment that system for 60, maybe 90 days. Not so coincidentally, right around the Super Bowl, ahead of the Super Bowl, right around Mardi Gras, and as you said, you all can't speak to their motivations or anything like that, but you can talk about and you haven't been given all of the details, right? So, starting at that tomorrow, this will begin, and again, we've been trying. The media has been trying to get some more specific information out of them. We're gonna have Leslie Harris on at 12:30 to talk a little bit more about this and dig down into this. So, Joe, one of the things that you described, and part of the reason we wanted to have you on today is to talk about what's working and what we are doing already that's working, and what else is necessary. We're coming up on the point in time count, right, for this year.
That's correct. That happens the last week in January, usually Monday and Tuesday night. So I think this year we'll be in the streets enumerating the number of folks experiencing homelessness on a given night. This doesn't tell us everybody who's homeless, but this gives us a good year-to-year comparison picture. So that's going to be the 27th and 28th of January, and we know what works is housing folks.
Right.
For folks with severe disabilities whose homelessness has been a long-term, permanent supportive housing, which is intensive case management services wrapped around a supportive housing voucher, works. for folks whose homelessness has been less long-term or whose disabilities maybe are less severe, rapid rehousing often can help stabilize a person over a 6 to 24-month period. And in both cases, when people have been able to acquire income, and we do help folks that we navigate to housing to get income, because we know that that is a part of being able to afford housing is having a baseline of income. If they're able to do that, they contribute from their income toward their own rental payments. And for folks who are in situations where they may be at risk of homelessness, we need local and state resources to knit in with the federal resources to provide problem solving, to help folks from falling into homelessness or to lift them quickly back into housing with a light touch. Maybe they don't need intensive case management services, but they just need that 1 month's deposit or a little rental assistance or utility arrears. Those types of things can be very effective, but federal funding doesn't serve those sorts of things. So we continue to work with our partners to build a stronger base of support for folks and to make sure that the services that we have available, the tools that we already have, are being used to their maximum efficiency.
So, thank you for joining us today, Joe. I want to go ahead and because I promised you I wouldn't keep you the whole hour, and I know you're busy. There's a lot going on, but I do want to kind of wrap it up on, so that folks understand. And I'm glad we got the question that we did from Benson, and I think it is important to continue to talk about how this system works, what else we need, what additional investments, the good actors, those of you who are. And again, part of the thing I want to make sure everybody understands is that you all are not claiming perfection. We talked about the evolution to this housing first model. And I particularly want to make sure we focus on that because what y'all are doing is proving that it's been working. I think in particular, when you all had the resources, one of the areas that I was so proud of the work that y'all were doing at Unity and saw such really tremendous success was when we got out of your way. And the reason we got out of your way was because there was a pandemic going on, and you all were given more resources to practice this and to complement it and coordinate it with. And interestingly enough, the state of Louisiana helped with that, right?
Yes, it did. It was a very good partnership. We were able to reduce street homelessness down to unprecedented numbers. In our service area, we're talking about at most dozens of people rather than hundreds of people experiencing homelessness, street homelessness. And the folks that we got into temporary shelter in hotels at that time,
That's
we
right.
were able to navigate over 75% of those people into permanent housing.
That's right. So when we didn't have to compete with visitors who were coming here ostensibly to help our economy and help. And again, I always want to talk about this with folks. It's like if the point of the economy, the economic argument that we are making is not that our community is stronger and our people benefit, what are we talking about? Like, and so when you don't have to compete with those folks, there's all these options and there's all of this innovation that already exists. Like, y'all didn't have to go out and bring people in. You all were like, okay, you're gonna give us more. You're gonna give us, and there were more. There were like hoteliers who wanted to help, landlords who were looking for guarantee payments, and we could stabilize that, and we could also do that on the other side as well. It was an interesting time, despite, and it was a time when we were able to be a little clearer about what it means to actually call this community your home and be safe, recognizing that, and I mean, and again, I the COVID time dilation is serious, but it's going to be 5 years from March 2020 in about 60 days. And what a way to mark the 5th anniversary of COVID, the city of New Orleans ending a temporary shelter program right after Mardi Gras. because yeah, like we not because we solved the problem, but because it's over. And instead of and then leaving you all and your partners to pick up the pieces.
I hope that's not the situation that we come to. I really hope that that we can find housing programs, housing locations, for people because that's what folks need. That's what folks want is housing, and the stability and the safety security that that provides.
Yep. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being with us. Joseph Hernmuller with Unity of Greater New Orleans. Thank you, Joe, for joining us. And right
Thanks.
on cue, I think we have our next guest on um, to talk about this. We're going to break this down a little bit more with one of our housing champions, on one of our elected officials who's been a housing champion, who's working with us last year around the Housing Trust Fund, leading on that issue, and has been leading on the issue around addressing homelessness, the unhoused population in New Orleans from a comprehensive perspective. Councilwoman Leslie Harris is joining us. First time on Put Housing First. Welcome, Councilwoman Harris.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Thank you for being here. We just had Joe Hiramulla from Unity on. Joe and I talked a little bit. We wanted to make sure that the listening audience understood the situation, understood the existing infrastructure, and focused on that. And of course, I was editorializing while he was talking and explaining things to people. But
Yeah.
I want to, and he shared that he did not have a lot of information about what the state was doing. But I understand that you have been, and I'm not going to speak for you and pretend like they told you everything, but I think you've got some more information, and I'd love for you to also recap and contextualize what's going on, especially the contextualizing inside of the work that you have been leading on Home for Good.
Yeah, so I actually don't have a lot more information. The state has been pretty tight-lipped about what they're doing. I do know there is a warehouse out on France Road that they are starting to, I guess, rehabilitate, putting in cots and other items, including heating implements, a commercial kitchen, and some other things. And what the plan is my understanding, is that they're going to stand this up by the end of the week, and then start corralling people from the streets and taking them to that location. Supposedly, there will be mental health services, health services. We have been pushing them to include rehousing services as well, because I don't think that was anything that was discussed by the state. And so theoretically, there should be some counselors to help people get into permanent supportive housing. That's what the state is planning, and this place is going to be there for 2 to 3 months. I don't know what the plan is after that 3 months expires. So it may be that people are just turned back out onto the street and back into the condition that they started.
And there's been some details, like the media has took the announcements, have asked, I think, some questions. There's some good stories. The Gambit in particular has broken down a lot of these pieces that we're going to go over today. But I do want to also talk about, because this has happened before, the Home for Good initiative, which is the long-term work that you've been leading on to address the crisis of the unhoused and lead to real long-term solutions. There's and some of the resources and opportunities that have manifested themselves have been CBD businesses, the tourism industry, who are responding to Carnival and the Super Bowl. But you all, working with the city, you all have been trying to turn those into long-term opportunities, right? Not just getting people out of the way.
Absolutely. So Home for Good was started about a year ago, and since that time, since December of last year, so 2023, we've housed around 800 people. And you have to understand that we have about 1,500 at last point in time count, people who are living on the street. So we are 53% from our goal, into our goal of housing around 800 people through Home for Good. Home for
Wow.
Good is a partnership between Unity and some other nonprofits, United Way, some business partners, some other philanthropic sources, as well as the city. And we have put money towards getting people not into shelter and then into housing, but directly from the street through vouchers into permanent supportive housing. The attrition rate, meaning the people who have stayed within that housing, is over 90%. So once we're getting people housed, they are staying housed through wraparound services and through other addiction treatments if they need that, through workforce placement. So what we're doing is working, and that's what's so upsetting about this new initiative from the state, is that the state sort of unilaterally set up the center without letting us know. I mean, my first indication was on Friday, official indication was on Friday, and we had asked the state for additional help for the Home for Good program with the ask of about $8 million, and we knew with that $8 million we could have housed an additional 375 people. So we would have been almost to our goal of housing most of the people who are street homeless. That proposal, that $8 million proposal, was not responded to by the state, and so that's what's left me puzzled about their new plan to open this
But they found the money.
transition housing.
They
found the money,
and
but not the money that we really needed, and that could have been an effective long-term solution.
So let's break this down. Let's talk about the money. Let's talk about the dollars that we're talking about here. So you all asked for $8 million, which would help you achieve your goal, help Home for Good achieve its goal of housing up to 800 people who were unhoused, and not warehousing them, actually housing them. And one of the things that I didn't get a chance to talk to Joe about is I want to make sure everybody also connects with this, how deep this issue runs. That one of the victims of the New Year's Eve attack is someone who was in the Housing First pipeline, who was in Unity's efforts. They were going to get him housed, and that's one of the folks who lost their life on New Year's Day in the French Quarter. And so when that those opportunities are that we're now costing people, instead of making investments in people and saying, you know what, we need to be focused on the people of New Orleans, right? The tourism industry, the sports ball is great. They're not the point. We're the point. The people are the point. And instead, we're seeing this doubling down on no, the sports ball is the point. The activities are the point, not the people. Because when you think about the fact that they are ponying up, and it could be $16 million total if they keep it open for 90 days. Right now, they're talking about $11.4 million to operate it for 60 days. That's still more than the $8 million you asked for to help house 800 folks permanently. What is with this math?
Let me just be clear. It was $8 million to house around 375 people, in addition to the 800 that we've already housed.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
So we would
please be.
Number one. I just want to be. Yeah, I want to be clear, but that would have left 400 people for us to then find housing through $2025, which we do have.
Right.
But the point is this, I've been asked by various people to sort of be quiet, let it play out. And my take on that is we saw what happened at the Taylor Swift concert, where people at the Calliope encampment, people who had vouchers in hand, were displaced into a place that's under the bridge and out of sight. There were people, vouchers in hand, where we were ready to close that encampment, get the people housed, and out by Thanksgiving. They were pushed out of sight. And they were pushed out of sight without any porta potties, without any hand washing stations, without any implements for cooking or anything else, without trash receptacles. So I'm a little skeptical about what this new warehouse is going to look like. I've
Well,
been promised a tour of it. I'm looking forward to seeing what that tour is. But I can't sit silent
no.
knowing what happened previously to people who were just literally picked up and pushed to the side and hidden out of sight for a concert.
Well, also too, the part of what they're saying here is they're also going to be busing people.
Yeah.
And while there are like Grace of the Green Light, and there are programs where after there's in pursuit of family reunification, in pursuit of self-sufficiency, in pursuit of stabilization, folks who have families other places. And before anybody gets up on their soapbox and starts talking about how the homeless ain't from here, the overwhelming majority of our street homeless populations are African American and Native New Orleanians.
That's right.
They are not from somewhere else, but they are. That's not the majority. And the continued erasure of our friends and family and neighbors is part of the problem. There are some people who have family other places, and it could be Native New Orleanians too. And I want everybody in this year of 2025, when we're looking at the 20th anniversary, to think about what it felt like when you had to take a bus out of here, if you had to take a bus out of here, or if you were able to drive out of here 20 years ago. It will be 20 years in August, and you had to leave if you were rescued or if you left of your own volition. But we were all evacuated. We were all deemed refugees in our own country. And if that is what this governor is preparing to do to our people, we cannot let it stand. Not again. Not this year. Certainly not ever, really, but certainly not the perversity of the state revisiting one of the greatest traumas on this city to a segment of its citizens, and we're just all going to sit back and watch it? Nope. Can't do it. Cannot do it. And so, Councilwoman Harris, we're glad that you're standing up and, again, asking questions. If they want to make it right, we're going to make a lot of illusions today. If they want to do right by people.
I have questions, and that's that we have a letter ready to go to the governor that asks those questions. How are people going to get to and from their doctor's appointments that are downtown where the medical centers are?
Right.
How are people who have jobs, because a lot of our street homeless people have jobs, how are they going to get to and from their jobs when they could have walked or biked when they were situated downtown? What rehousing services are going to be provided? What's going to happen after the big million-dollar question is what's going to happen after the 3 months? Are they just going to be put back on the street? And that's no way to decommission the encampments. It's disruptive of the work that we've done that is proven to have worked. It is proven that 90% of the people who are housed from the streets stay in permanent supportive housing.
Right.
We know that works.
We know that works.
That's the way to do it, and this is not the way to do it. But there are fundamental, just basic questions. Transportation.
Right. Well, and also
provided. Who are these armed guards? Who are the armed guards that are guarding these people?
Right.
I just don't.
That's what I wanted to get into, some of these specifics, and I want to back this up too. You started talking about this. You're going to get a tour of the facility, and we want to hear about that, the details of that once it happens. Because there is a troubling item in the budget that suggests that they will be tearing this center down at the end of it to the tune of about $454,000. I think sunk cost fallacy is a bit of a, it's one of those problem children. It's like, well, how in the world could you possibly be making a substantive, worthwhile investment of something that you're going to spend $500,000 tearing down afterwards? And is this serving another purpose? The idea of allowing this thing to be used temporarily, and this is just a way of tearing it down, getting the money to tear it down because that's what you really wanted? It's like, and I know you can't answer these questions, but these are the questions that the listening audience should be asking and demanding of the governor and our state representatives who are responsible for the budget for this money being spent this way. But I do want to connect some of the dots here. There's a lot of pieces in here that relate to what you all do at Home for Good, what Unity does in their work, what the low barrier shelter is. You've got armed guards who are going to be paid $117 an hour. $117 an hour for armed guards. We're not sure what they're going to be doing, and what kind of security measures is that going to be? Are people going to be in? Is this an internment camp where they can't come and go as they please? You're going to have medical service coordinators, which is good. That's great. Shift supervisors and safety officers will earn a similar rate of $115 an hour. Crisis counselors will make $100 per hour, with housing specialists earning between $80 and $90. So another question is, these are short-term jobs, but we do a lot of seasonal work here. How many local New Orleanians are going to get to help with this? How many people who already do this work, who may have lost their jobs or maybe working with an agency who are familiar with these folks, how many of them are going to get to be hired by this company out of Lafayette that is backed by the finance fund that bought our natural gas business here in Louisiana? Yeah, like, what are these questions? And again, Councilwoman Harris, I know you're working with the same questions that we have. But I want to make sure the listening audience really understands what we're talking about, that there's going to be 21 to 39 jobs that are temporary jobs that are going to be created. And we talk about this all the time when people make these kinds of investments. If it is for our community, why isn't our community participating? Forget about the cost benefits, just to make sure that there are people there who are looking out for our friends and neighbors.
Right. And who know our friends and neighbors. I mean, that's the point, is that we are a community, and we know the people who are sleeping outside. That's what outreach does. That's the relationship that Outreach, Unity, Travelers Aid, Nate Field's office does, is outreach so that you get to know somebody and you can help problem solve with them and you can understand what their needs are. And I don't know if you can create those relationships within 2 months or 3 months in a sort of, warehouse situation. I will tell you that I just visited the Low Barrier Shelter yesterday, which is now run by Odyssey House.
Mm-hmm.
There is space because that is in the VA. There is space to expand the Low Barrier Shelter, but again, that was not put on the table.
Right.
I mean, this was a unilateral decision made without consultation with anybody at the city. There were other options to be had.
Right.
So even if you're saying, we're not going to give you the $8 million to house 375 people, but we want another shelter, we could have expanded the Low Barrier Shelter with Odyssey House running it, which also provides addiction services and mental health services, and got that up and running probably quicker, and with people able to then, because they are in city center, go to their jobs and get to their health appointments, et cetera, get to transit quicker than this place, which the nearest bus stop, I think, is a mile outside of where it's located.
Right. I mean, and I think this is part of the piece that we talk about when we talk about housing and making sure we're citing it appropriately. There are not every low to moderate income person, not everyone that needs affordable housing needs to be on the bus. Some people have cars and they just need a safe place that they can afford. But when you're talking about, but you also at the same time cannot ignore the needs of the population. Someone who is street homeless, they may have a car. They may be sleeping in their car.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the question is also how much thought has been put into that, right? We saw we saw a list that when you look at what the governor's press release says, you talk about we see lists of jobs. We don't see transportation specialists. We don't see drivers. We see a lot of investment of people who are there who can keep folks there. And a lot of the shelters allow for people to, especially if they've got to go to, they might have a job. I mean, I think this is the other
Yep.
thing that people don't think about. And I know you know this because you've been working on this issue. A lot of our homeless folks, street homeless folks, have jobs or
Yeah.
something else that people don't think about, or need to go to school because they are trying to get an education. They're trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And yes, and then they are staying in a shelter or they're sleeping on the streets. And how is this facility going to allow them to, live and pursue their happiness? And we're not sure. We're not sure how this is going to work. And we need more information. And it would have been better if, and one of the things I want to go back to is you all put a request in of the state that went ignored, that went unanswered.
Right.
Where has, and we saw this after the Taylor Swift incident. Did they come back to the table and say, well, look, this is what we want to see happen?
No, that didn't happen. I mean, again, we got these. I heard some sort of rumor about it. We got the official. This is going to happen on last Friday, and then now it's just sort of full speed ahead with people, going out and seeing that there's equipment. They're fixing the roof. They're installing heating because this is a warehouse.
Right.
Let's be clear, it's a warehouse.
It's a warehouse.
So no. And then the other thing I want to say is this, Andronica. We know that when the Taylor Swift sweeps happened and when people were corralled into an area that they didn't want to be in, naturally they move to other areas. So they move into neighborhoods.
Right.
And then the calls come to my office and to Nate's office and to Unity and to other service providers saying, get this person off my lawn. Well, it's very hard to get people off of private property because oftentimes they'll say, well, I have permission to be here. And so it's just a very disruptive thing that happens anytime a sweep like this happens because we know that not everybody is going to go to France Road. We know that people are going to end up in the neighborhoods, and we know that it's just going to result in more complaints from neighbors who are upset that there are new people moving into their neighborhoods.
And that also is one of the things that we're urging the listening audience, both here in New Orleans, anybody listening anywhere, to take a breath when it comes to these issues. We understand. I think Councilwoman Harris has her bona fides on this issue. We understand the tension, right, of someone sleeping on your lawn or you're in your backyard and people feeling unsafe and afraid and just inconvenienced. And that there are services to help with that. But we are also talking about folks who have been pushed out and displaced. We all deserve to be here. And so calling your office, you take the calls, Nate takes the calls, Unity takes the calls. But what we have to also focus on is not necessarily that person, but the systems, fixing the systems. Here we are spending $11 million of our money, of taxpayers' dollars, of citizens' resources, our government's resources, on a short-term solution when $8 million would have gotten us to long-term solutions, and one that respected folks and that was a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, I'm not sure where we are and why we are the way it is. That we are, we have leaders who are insisting on the win-lose. And we all need to be very careful because when these kinds of things happen, I mean, I think that this is an internment camp, that this could become an internment camp. That's the risk here. And when we interned our own citizens, Japanese Americans, because of what this government thought they might do after Pearl Harbor, that was a stain on this country's history. There have been other stains. This is a former slave port, so there are other stains, and more recent ones, as a matter of fact. But I think this one is the most analogous because carting people off and sticking them somewhere is something that we need to be really, really worried about. Who will be next? Who will be next? And beyond the fact that, just from a practical standpoint, you might want to be worried about if you're going to be next. This is just wrong. Packing up our people and pushing them out of sight because we don't want to take the time to do right by them when we failed them in the first place. It's not right. And I want to thank you, Councilwoman Harris, for wanting to keep us informed and educated, for being able to be at the table to figure it out and speaking up. And also hope, and maybe you being at the table can turn the tide. Maybe they will make some changes so that this doesn't become an internment camp. But this is also something that the citizens we have to get engaged around this. And I know the folks in that neighborhood are also concerned about that this is a signal that their community is going to continue to receive disinvestments or the wrong kinds of investments. We have to hear those concerns and balance them with the rights and needs of these individuals. We can't pit vulnerable populations against each other. That's how we lose. That's how we lose. And so this can be, because in the best scenario, some of these folks might want to live in Pontchartrain Park. They might want to buy a house in Pontchartrain Park. Heck, they may have been people who used to live in Pontchartrain Park and got pushed out after Hurricane Katrina. And now they find themselves 20 years later here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think everybody thinks about that. I don't think everybody remembers that the trauma and tragedy and how so many people have still not recovered. We're still down over 100,000, mostly African-American citizens after Katrina. People who still have not come back. Some of them chose not to come back. They found better things somewhere else. A lot of them didn't have a choice. A lot of them, we don't even know where they are. They could be under a bridge right now. They could be sleeping in their car right now. And so, Councilwoman, we're going to be wrapping up. Is there anything else you want to add, share, so that the listening audience can be on the lookout for?
I will just keep you all updated as I learn more information. And as far as having a seat at the table, I didn't, but I will continue to fight to.
We got to get you at the table. We got to get you at the table.
Well, we have to fight. We all have to fight, and you can see that we still have to continue the fight to make sure that we have a seat at the table, that our community's voices are heard, because otherwise we're going to keep getting these same results of being left out of decisions that impact everybody's lives in New Orleans.
Well, with that, I think that is a great way to end this is our first live show of the year, by the way. So welcome, and we got to have you back. I can't believe this is the first time you've been on. I think we tried a couple of times and we did not succeed. So
well, I will be back.
Yeah, we will definitely have you back. And we'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel on WBOK 1230 a.m. And remember, everyone, in order to be a community, we got to live together. So that's what we mean by when we say put housing first. We're talking about the foundations of community. I'm your host, Andronika Mars. We'll be back next week. I want to thank our guests, Johira Muller and Councilwoman Leslie Harris, for joining us. And y'all stay safe out there.